The holiday season, a time for reflection, joy, and the return of some of our favorite games. But what if just for a moment we could step into the world of shifting sands, acrobatic feats, and perilous, time-bending adventures? What if we could relive the events of Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, one of the most praised titles to release on the PlayStation 2? It's been years since this masterpiece has swept us off our feet with its daring parkour, immersive storytelling, and its revolutionary time-bending mechanics that changed the way we think about gameplay. But as the holiday season fills the air with nostalgia, we can't help but look back on the impact that it had, the magic it captured, and why, just like the sands of time, it never really leaves us. So grab a mug of hot cocoa, dust off your console, and join me as we recall the tale of a very merry Prince of Persia Christmas.
Hello everyone, and happy holidays. I'm so glad you could join me for such a special video. So, I know when thinking about the holidays, a lot of you think about Santa Claus, Christmas trees, and presents. But instead, we're going to Persia! I'm actually really looking forward to this, as I've only heard great things about this game, but surely nothing will happen that will sour my experience at all. Right? So after hitting new game on the main menu, we immediately gain control, which really surprised me. I haven't seen many games do that, but before we talk about the opening of the game, I have to take a moment here to talk about my boy Yuri Lowenthal. He had a massive chokehold in the voice acting world in the early 2000s, and honestly, still kinda does to this day. Like, Ben 10, that was him. Sasuke, that was him. Yosuke, that was him. You cannot escape this man, because he also voices the Prince of Persia. But now, back to the game. So, we start with a shot of some girl laying on a bed, but she wakes up very suddenly for some reason, and it cuts to our protagonist running through the jungle while beginning to tell us the story about the Sands of Time. We then learn the protagonist is quite literally the Prince of Persia, and we're in the middle of a full-scale battle to raid the treasury of Azad to find the Dagger of Time. A dagger so powerful that is said to have the ability to control time itself. I know for a fact the first thing you would use this dagger for is to redo that turkey you made for Christmas dinner, but don't worry, I won't tell. After this scene, we gain control of the Prince of Persia and get our bearings on how to play the game. Here we learn about general combat and platforming, and how awesome this music is. Like, this game has really good music for its time. After defeating some rather sad-looking guards, we make our way to the first water spring. We can walk up to these to regain our health. After making our way through some more guards, we arrive in the treasury. Here we do some really sick parkour and steal the Dagger of Time, and we barely make it out in time before the place collapses. After this, we learn that the Vizier is also after the Dagger of Time and will stop at nothing to have it so he can take Persia for himself. The Vizier then talks the prince into activating the Sands of Time with the dagger, turning everyone he knows and loves into a sand monster, which takes us into another fight. This fight teaches us the mechanics of the sand dagger. To explain it briefly, when we send an enemy to the ground, we can press the triangle button to do a finishing attack that allows the dagger to suck the sand into it, so we can have more chances to rewind time. Rewinding time is helpful in plenty of ways, like allowing us to move in a different way to avoid getting hit, or to just redo platforming sections. After this, we reach our first save point. These also give us visions to give us a brief understanding of what the platforming is going to look like in the next section of the game. We then make our way to where this girl is that we rescued, but before we get there, we learn about upgrades. When we get 8 sand clouds, we get another sand tank added so we can do more rewinds. And there are hidden health springs that give us more HP, and trust me, we are going to need it. And when we retrieve sand from the sand enemies, it gives us a power attack to stun them and defeat them easier. After platforming our way through the palace, we find the girl we were looking for and demands we give her the dagger. She tells us her name is Farah, and she is the daughter of the king from whom we stole the dagger from. The prince doesn't believe that she wants things to return to how they were, because the Vizier turned against them and he trusts nobody but himself. But we immediately save her from these sand scarabs. After some more platforming, we make our way to the first big puzzle of the game. Here, we are tasked with aligning the 4 axles with the correct holes to turn on the Azad defense system.
Make sure you pick them up in the right order!
This puzzle has been said to trump a lot of people and even make them stop wanting to play the game, but luckily for me, I did it first try. After some more epic platforming, we make our way back to where we learned about the sand dagger combat. But this time, we have to save Farah from our father-turned-sand monster. This fight was actually really difficult for me, because up to this point the game just teaches you to fight a certain way, but that certain way doesn't always work. So several tries later, we unfortunately defeat our father and save Farah. She tries to console us for the loss of our father, but we're in such disbelief and refuse to admit that was him. We're then formally introduced to the visions that we have, but we've seen them quite a few times up to this point, and it really holds no weight for the story. Farah then warns us that if we do not take the dagger back to the Sands of Time, the sand will consume everything. She then sweet talks us into finding the hourglass and setting things right. So now we truly begin our parkour-filled journey to the Tower of Dawn. But in order to get there, we first have to parkour around the palace, which honestly at this point just feels like a ton of fluff, and not a lot of story actually happens here. It's just a lot of fighting enemies and doing parkour, which brings us to the baths. Here, we obtain our first new sword in the Sword of the Mighty Warrior. This sword allows us to bust open walls to either find secrets or progress the story, and we even get to do more damage to enemies. After this, we finally make our way under the palace, but we come up at a different part of it. We're now in the Soldiers' Mess Hall, now filled with sand monsters. After we defeat these monsters, we have successfully made it outside of the palace, but we now must make our way through the other side of the palace, which is filled with more enemies and traps that honestly just make zero sense without the palace just being in ruin. So we get through that area and find ourselves in a cave, filled with wall running and jumping onto rocks hanging from the ceiling, with bats chasing you, and if they manage to hit you even one time, you will fall to your death. This whole section really wasn't too great, and honestly just kind of feels like a slog to get through. But now, we get to one of my least favorite parts of the entire game. The sewer section. So this room really had me stumped for a good 30 minutes because the layout of the room is it just doesn't click with me, and it just honestly doesn't make sense in my head. And it didn't help that the ropes in this room look like they're so far apart that you can't even make the jump, but actually, unless you jump at a very specific time, you will miss the jump every single time you attempt it. It really wasn't very fun, and I will forever and always hate this section of the game. So, we finally make it through this section and climb our way out of the sewer, only to be greeted by another fight. Which, by the way, at this point in the game, every single fight is just going to have so many enemies that you're just begging for it to end so you can progress the game. And with how sluggish the combat feels in general, it honestly feels like each fight takes upwards of 10 minutes. Like, at this point, all I wanted for Christmas was to see the credits roll because the combat is just so boring. After defeating the sand monsters and parkouring through the palace, we once again meet up with Farah, and she says she knows how to reach the Tower of Dawn. So she brings us to the palace library, and we take out some more enemies and do another platforming puzzle, which gives us our second sword, and it allows us to do even more damage to enemies and break walls with one slash. After this section, we unlock access to the observatory. Here, we have to align the planets to open up the path out of here, and we're just moments away from entering the Tower of Dawn and saving all of Persia. So, we make our way around the outskirts of the palace, but the bridge we're standing on crumbles beneath our feet and we fall directly into the palace prison. This section is actually really fun and satisfying to pull off in one fell swoop. This area has some of the best platforming in the game, and it genuinely feels like the developers wanted to use this area to test what you know about the game up to this point. We then soon make it out of the prison and enter the Tower of Dawn, but in order to get close to the top, we have to do what is, in my opinion, the worst part of this entire game. So it's you, plus Farah, plus several waves of enemies that are constantly spawning, and sometimes they can just completely ignore you and just focus Farah, causing you to waste the last 10 minutes of your life. Or they're just going to combo you over and over and over and over again, and make you completely regret the last several hours you've been playing the game up to this point. So after slamming my head into a wall for well over an hour, I remembered that there's an ability in the game that allows you to just pause time for everything in the room and lets you just kill everything with one hit. After remembering this mechanic existed, I did it first try and was so excited for it to be over, but unfortunately we still have to make it to the top of the tower, which brings us to the tower treasury. We parkour our way on top of the hourglass, and Farah tells us to insert the dagger into the hole in the top. Right before we could finish, we stop and wonder why Farah is helping us to begin with. because our father captured her as a slave. But right as we're about to insert the dagger, the Vizier makes a surprise appearance and creates a sandstorm and sends the prince and Farah flying, but luckily they're able to hold on to a column in the room. Just as the Vizier is about to get the dagger, the prince lets go and manages to take it right before the Vizier can pick it up. Unfortunately, the sandstorm is so strong that it sends them flying into a hole in the ground. So for this next scene, I genuinely thought something was wrong with my game. They were talking to each other, but all I could see was sand and a black void. So I went and looked at other people playing the game and nope. This is actually just a choice they made. Great job, Ubisoft. Confusing people since 1986. Farah then tells us of how her mother would tell her there was a special word she could say when she was afraid that would open a magical door. We asked what the word is and she says, Kakulukium, which actually causes a magical door to open, revealing a hidden area under the Tower of Dawn. This part of the game was actually really interesting, because it took me a minute to understand what was going on here. So pretty much what we have to do is figure out the correct path to get to wherever Farah is. And to do so, we have to figure out which doorway makes a sound, and that sound cue is what is going to tell us the correct way to go. After sharing a very intimate moment with Farah, we wake up, but she took both our sword and our dagger. Which brings me to what is honestly my favorite part of this entire game. We have to make our way to the top of the tower with nothing but the skin on our back. But before we can continue, we have to do this mirror puzzle to unlock the final sword of the game. The Sword of the Enlightened Warrior. This sword allows us to kill everything in just one hit, making the fights leading up to the very end a breeze. We then make our way to the top of the tower, where we see Farah is trying to defend herself with our old sword. Unfortunately, she isn't very skilled with it and is hanging off the edge, only able to hold onto the dagger. Unfortunately, she slips, but thankfully we grab onto the blade of the dagger. Ouch. She then knows that she has to go, so she lets go of the dagger while also saying the word for bravery and falls to her death. We then clear all the enemies left in the room and go check on her. She is in fact dead and there is no sand left in the dagger. We can't rewind time and fix anything. The Vizier then pops up out of nowhere and tells the prince if he gives him the dagger, he will give him unimaginable power. The prince then chooses to right his wrongs and rushes to the top of the hourglass and stabs it, causing us to go back to the beginning of the game, where we see Farah waking up again, and that scene of the prince in the jungle from the beginning was actually him racing to Farah to give her the dagger to avoid all of this ever even happening. The prince then explains to Farah the entire journey he went on to get to this point, which is actually kind of meta if you think about it. Like, the whole game up to this point was being told as a story, but to whom it was being told, we had no idea until now. After Farah learns of what happened, the Vizier once again pops up unannounced like one of the uncles that nobody likes at the family gathering, and demands the dagger, or he is going to kill Farah and tell her father that the prince did it. This unfortunately leads to one of the worst final bosses I have ever seen. There is nothing complex about this whatsoever. The Vizier summons 3 clones, and once you take them out, you Sparta kick him through the window, where we deliver the final blow. We then hand the dagger to Farah to return to her father's treasury. She then asks the prince for his name, and he says, "Just call me Kakulukium," and the game ends from there. Honestly, this game was a trip. While fun at first, the game really starts to lose a lot of its charm by the halfway point and just becomes really sluggish and frustrating. But despite this, it just barely manages to come back around by the end. I can sort of understand why people speak so highly of this game, but honestly for me this game gets a 7.5 out of 10. It honestly serves as a great foundation for the 3D Prince of Persia games, but surely it only gets better from here, right? Thank you all for watching and have a happy holidays.
So, what did you think? As we close out our journey through the sands, it's clear that the Prince of Persia Sands of Time is more than just a game. It's a timeless adventure, a holiday gift that keeps on giving. Every leap, every puzzle, and every rewind of time. It taught us about the delicate balance of fate and free will, about the importance of redemption and the beauty of second chances. In a season where we reflect on the past and look to the future, this game reminds us of the importance of cherishing the moments we have and never taking time for granted. For the prince and for us all, it's not about the destination, but the journey. So whether you're visiting the lands of Persia for the first time or the 50th time, remember that sometimes the best gifts are the memories that we make and the adventures that stay with us long after we finish playing. So thank you for joining in and watching, and happy holidays.